40 F-35s gone. Not in a dogfight, not in a daring raid over enemy airspace, destroyed on the ground, inside hardened shelters, before a single Israeli pilot could strap in. And it happened in 30 minutes flat. Let that sink in, because what I'm about to walk you through isn't speculation. It isn't analysis filtered through some Pentagon press briefing. And it sure as hell isn't the sanitized version you're going to get from CNN or Fox. This is what actually happened at Nevatim Air Base. And by the time I'm done, you will understand why the geopolitical map of the Middle East, the one that Washington spent 50 years and trillions of dollars drawing, was redrawn in fire and smoke before the sun came up over the Negev Desert. I've spent decades studying weapons systems, military doctrine, and intelligence tradecraft. First as a Marine Corps intelligence officer, then as a UN weapons inspector who stood inside facilities that governments swore didn't exist. I know what a real strategic shift looks like. I've watched them happen in real time, and I've watched governments lie about them in real time. What happened at Nevatim is one of the most consequential military events of the 21st century. And the fact that Western media is still fumbling to characterize it tells you everything you need to know about how badly it has shattered the assumptions that hold their entire worldview together. Let me be clear from the start. This wasn't a lucky strike. This wasn't Iranian bluster accidentally connecting with a target. This was the result of years of systematic intelligence collection, precision engineering developed entirely under sanctions, and a strike doctrine specifically designed to defeat the layered air defense architecture that Israel and the United States spent decades and billions of dollars constructing. When you understand all three of those elements together, you stop being surprised by the result. You start being terrified by the implications. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you first have to understand what Nevatim Air Base actually represents in Israel's strategic architecture. This isn't a forward operating strip somewhere in the Sinai. Nevatim is the crown jewel of Israeli air power, the nerve center, the launch pad, the irreplaceable hub from which Israel has projected lethal force across the entire region for years. Every significant Israeli strike into Syria, every hit on Hezbollah's weapons infrastructure, every deep penetration mission against Iranian-linked targets, they all originated from Nevatim. The base doesn't just house aircraft, it houses Israel's offensive doctrine made physical. Destroy Nevatim's flight line. And you don't just destroy planes, you destroy Israel's ability to reach out and touch its enemies at the time and place of its choosing. Iran understood that perfectly, and they planned accordingly. The F-35 ADR, that's what Israel calls its variant, isn't just a fighter jet. In the context of Middle Eastern air power, it's a statement. Each airframe costs well over $0 million, and that price tag buys you the most sophisticated sensor fusion package ever put in a tactical aircraft. Radar-evading coatings that make it effectively invisible to most air defense radars, and a worked warfare capability that lets a single pilot serve as a flying command node for an entire strike package. Washington didn't sell Israel these jets as equipment. Washington sold them as a guarantee, a 30-year insurance policy on Israeli air supremacy that was supposed to make any adversary in the region think twice, 3 times, and then stand down. 40 of them destroyed on the ground in 30 minutes is not just a military loss. It is the cancellation of that guarantee written in the wreckage of $4 billion worth of American engineering. Now stay with me here, because the how of this attack is where everything gets profoundly uncomfortable for the people who've been dismissing Iran's military capabilities for the past 2 decades. The strike began at 2:17 in the morning local time, and that timing was not arbitrary. Iranian planners had done their homework not over weeks, but over years. Having worked in intelligence myself, I can tell you that the kind of operational picture Iran built on Israeli air defense rotations, radar coverage gaps, and command center staffing patterns at Arrow 200 hours doesn't come from one source. It comes from layered patient-persistent intelligence collection, electronic intercepts, drone surveillance at altitudes and distances that don't trigger alarms, and human intelligence networks that Western analysts consistently underestimate because acknowledging them would require acknowledging that Iran's intelligence apparatus is genuinely world-class. It is. And the attack that kicked off at 2:17 proved it beyond any reasonable argument. The opening move was a saturation wave of low observable decoy drones launched from multiple vectors simultaneously. Now, when I say saturation, I want you to understand what that word means in practical air defense terms. Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow system, Israel's layered defense architecture, are not infinitely capable. Every battery has a finite number of interceptor missiles. Every radar has a finite processing capacity. Every command system has a finite number of tracks it can handle simultaneously before the software starts making triage decisions about which threats get addressed and which ones get queued. Iranian planners knew the exact thresholds. They had calculated them, and they deliberately flooded the radar picture with enough decoys to push every battery past those thresholds simultaneously. The technical term is saturation paralysis. The practical result is that Iron Dome's engagement computers were essentially chasing phantoms while the real weapons were already descending. The Fath-360 salvos came in from two directions at once, from western Iran and from mobile launchers that had been pre-positioned in Iraqi territory using approach angles that exploited gaps in Israeli radar coverage that the IDF thought were theoretical vulnerabilities, not operational ones. The salvos were organized into packets of 8 to 12 missiles each, every packet assigned to a specific hardened shelter at Navatim. The entire barrage from first impact to final detonation was compressed into under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Israel's internal alert system was still cycling through its warning protocols when the second and third waves were already in terminal descent. And here's the detail that I want you to hold on to, because this is the part that tells you everything about the intelligence penetration Iran achieved. At the exact same moment Nevatim was being hammered, a separate strike package hit Ramon Air Base in the southern Negev. Ramon was where Israel had quietly relocated a reserve batch of F-35s as a contingency, a dispersal move designed precisely to ensure that no single strike could take out the entire fleet. It's standard doctrine. It's what any competent Air Force does when it believes an attack is possible. The problem is that Iran knew. They knew the dispersal locations. They knew the exact shelter assignments at Raoni, and they hit them with the same terminal accuracy they achieved at Nitim. The crater patterns confirm it. The IDF hasn't admitted it publicly, but the craters don't negotiate with official statements. By 2:47 in the morning, 30 minutes after the first launch, the damage assessment reaching IDF headquarters was so catastrophic that senior officers initially refused to accept the numbers. 40 aircraft confirmed destroyed or beyond economical repair. 3 hardened shelter complexes structurally compromised. The main fuel and ammunition depot at Nitim burning out of control. Ramon's dispersal area hit with matching precision 30 minutes. The entire offensive air capability of the most technologically sophisticated military force in the Middle East neutralized inside half an hour. I want to put that in historical context because context is everything. In June of 1967, Israel launched Operation Focus, a preemptive strike that destroyed the Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian air forces and established Israeli air supremacy for the entire six-day war. That operation took roughly 3 hours and required Israel to physically fly its aircraft into enemy airspace with all the risk that entailed. What Iran executed last night achieved a comparable strategic result. The elimination of an adversary's air combat capability in 30 minutes from over 1,000 kilometers away against a fully alerted enemy with the most expensive layered missile defense system ever assembled. There is no modern parallel. This is not hyperbole. I have spent my career studying military operations, and I am telling you directly what happened at Nitim belongs in a category by itself. You think you've grasped the full weight of this. You haven't. Not yet. Because understanding what happened requires understanding the weapon that made it possible. And understanding that weapon requires confronting just how completely wrong Western analysts have been about Iran's defense industry for the past 15 years. The Fath-360 had been on Western radar for a while, and the consensus assessment was dismissive. Short to medium range, solid fuel, decent accuracy for the region, useful for tactical applications, not a strategic threat. Pentagon briefers and think tank analysts had essentially categorized it as a regional nuisance, a system that Israel's defenses could manage, swat down, and absorb without serious consequence. I've sat in rooms with people who held that view and argued it with complete confidence. Last night's events represent the most complete single-night repudiation of an intelligence community consensus I have seen in my professional lifetime. What the analysts missed wasn't the missile's range. It was the terminal guidance package and the doctrine built around it. In the final phase of flight, the Fath-360 activates an onboard electro-optical seeker, a camera system paired with a radar altimeter and an inertial navigation unit. The missile stops relying on GPS entirely in the terminal phase. Instead, it looks at the ground below it, compares what it sees against a preloaded digital image of the specific target structure, and steers itself to a precise impact point on that building. Not GPS coordinates, the actual physical structure visually confirmed in real time. This is why weeks of American GPS jamming operations across the region had zero effect on accuracy. You cannot jam a missile that isn't using GPS to find its target. The guidance architecture was specifically designed to defeat the jamming systems the United States deployed because Iranian engineers had studied those systems, understood their capabilities and their limitations, and built around them. That's not luck. That's sophisticated, patient adversarial engineering. The solid fuel propellant means the launcher vehicle can move, set up, and fire in a matter of minutes, with almost no thermal bloom for overhead satellites to detect during the setup phase. Mobile, fast-reacting, and leaving virtually no pre-launch signature. When you combine that with salvo fire doctrines specifically calculated to exceed battery reload capacity, 8 to 12 missiles per packet, launched in under 90 seconds per packet from multiple vectors simultaneously. You have a system that was purpose-built to do exactly what it did last night. Western analysts called it a tactical gimmick. Iranian engineers called it a strategic architecture. The craters at Neatim and Ramon tell you who was right. And here is what I need you to sit with for a moment, because this is the part of the story that carries the most profound long-term implications of anything I've told you so far. Every element of the Fath-360, the propellant chemistry, the guidance electronics, the manufacturing tooling, the quality control infrastructure was designed and built inside Iran under the most comprehensive sanctions regime the United States has ever imposed on a country short of a full wartime blockade. The sanctions were supposed to prevent exactly this. They were supposed to deny Iran access to the materials, the technology, and the expertise needed to develop systems like this. And in a narrow technical sense, they did create obstacles, real ones, significant ones. But what the architects of those sanctions failed to account for, what they consistently, arrogantly, catastrophically failed to account for, is that sustained isolation doesn't just create hardship. It creates self-sufficiency. It forces innovation. It builds an industrial and engineering culture that can no longer depend on anyone else and therefore learns to depend entirely on itself. Iran's defense industry today is not strong despite the sanctions. It is strong because of them. The isolation that was meant to guarantee weakness produced instead a military industrial capability that just destroyed 60% of Israel's F-35 fleet in half an hour. Let that be the final word on the theory that economic pressure alone can contain a determined adversary. Keep watching, because what comes next, the American response, or more precisely the American paralysis, is where the true depth of this crisis becomes impossible to deny. Within hours of the last impact at Neatim, the White House Situation Room was standing room only. The National Security Council in emergency session, the Joint Chiefs on secure video with CENTCOM, the Secretary of State burning through his contact list with every Gulf ally simultaneously. And after all of that, all those generals, all those advisors, all that institutional firepower assembled in one room, the public statement that emerged was two words: deep concern. That phrase landed in Tel Aviv like a second missile strike. Because anyone who has spent time inside the machinery of American national security, as I have, knows exactly what deep concern means. It means we don't know what to do, and we're terrified of doing the wrong thing. The reality is that the American playbook for this region just hit a wall it cannot climb. The usual sequence: rush carrier groups into the Gulf, issue a credible military threat, work back channel pressure to force de-escalation, and if that fails, execute precision strikes on Iranian assets to restore deterrence. That sequence assumes a specific set of conditions that no longer exist. It assumes Iran can be intimidated. Last night proved it cannot. It assumes American forward bases in the region are outside the operational reach of Iranian ballistic missiles. The accuracy demonstrated at Neatim against hardened shelters at over 1,000 kilometers range just demolished that assumption completely and publicly, and it assumes that a retaliatory strike on Iran stays contained. Every serious war game run in the past 5 years shows that a major American strike on Iranian territory triggers simultaneous activation of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi missile and drone operations from Yemen, and Iraqi militia strikes on American installations across Iraq and Syria. That's not a limited exchange. That's a regional war with no ceiling. And Washington's own modeling says the costs are ones it is not prepared to pay. What the mainstream media won't tell you, what the Pentagon briefers are desperately hoping nobody calculates out loud, is the question that is actually dominating classified discussions right now. If Iran can hit Nevatim from over 1,000 kilometers with the accuracy demonstrated last night, what does that mean for Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar? What does it mean for Al Dhafra in the UAE? What does it mean for Incirlik in Turkey, where American assets and infrastructure have been quietly accumulating for years? The answer to that question isn't classified. The physics are the same, the guidance architecture is the same, the salvo doctrine is the same. The silence from the Pentagon isn't confusion. It's the sound of an institution that has just realized its entire forward-facing posture in the Middle East is sitting inside the Fath-360's operational envelope, and that the system just proved in live combat that it works exactly as advertised. Having served in military intelligence, I can tell you that the worst moment in any strategic assessment isn't when the enemy does something you didn't anticipate. The worst moment is when the enemy does something you anticipated, dismissed, and failed to prepare for anyway. That is precisely where American defense planners are sitting this morning. The vulnerability was real. The warnings existed, buried in assessments that got downgraded and deprioritized because acknowledging them would have required rethinking assumptions that too many careers and too many budget cycles were built upon. Now the assumptions are rubble, and the careers and the budget cycles are scrambling to catch up with a reality that already moved on without them. For Israel, the immediate operational consequences are severe, and they are not recoverable on any timeline that matters in the current conflict environment. 40 F-35s represent approximately 60% of Israel's operational ADR fleet. The surviving aircraft have been dispersed to civilian airports and secondary fields, locations that offer far less in the way of hardened infrastructure, maintenance capability, and logistical support than Nevatim provided. Every hour that passes without a follow-up Iranian strike is an hour Iran is choosing restraint, which means Iran now controls the tempo of this conflict. That is a fundamental inversion of the strategic relationship that has defined Israeli military planning for a generation. Israel has always been the actor that set the pace, that chose when and where force was applied, that held the initiative. That initiative now belongs to Thrawn. The operational consequences cascade immediately across every active front. Gaza operations are proceeding with a fraction of the close air support that Israeli ground forces have relied upon throughout the campaign. Northern Front planning against Hezbollah has been fundamentally altered overnight because Hezbollah's senior leadership can read a damage assessment as well as anyone, and their calculus on escalation has shifted accordingly. Syrian airspace, which Israeli aircraft had been transiting with near impunity for years to interdict Iranian weapons transfers to Hezbollah, is now effectively closed to Israeli operations. Those weapons transfers will resume and accelerate. The strategic depth that air power provided Israel across every dimension of this conflict has been drastically compressed in a single operational window. And then there is the financial reality, which is brutal in its own right. Each F-35 airframe costs over $100 million. 40 of them represent $4 billion in hardware losses before you calculate the cost of destroyed infrastructure, depot equipment, munitions, and the years of specialized maintenance investment embedded in each airframe. There is no emergency appropriation, no congressional supplemental, no American aid package that restores that capability on any timeline relevant to the conflicts Israel is managing right now. The United States can express solidarity. It can expedite deliveries from the existing F-35 production line, but the production line has a fixed throughput. It serves customers across NATO and the Indo-Pacific. And Israel is not going to jump that queue in a way that doesn't create its own set of alliance problems. The air power that was destroyed last night cannot be replaced in months. It cannot be replaced in a year. The operational gap is measured in years, and the adversaries who created it know that perfectly well. Step back from the immediate military picture and look at what last night means at the level of global strategic order, because that is where the truly lasting consequences are being registered. The post-Cold War security architecture in the Middle East was constructed on two foundational assumptions. First, that American military power in the region is so overwhelming and so credibly deployed that no regional actor can rationally challenge it. Second, that Israel's qualitative military edge, its technological superiority, its intelligence dominance, its offensive reach is essentially permanent and therefore serves as a reliable anchor for regional stability. Iran, in 30 minutes using missiles built entirely within its own borders under sanctions, just invalidated both of those assumptions simultaneously and publicly in a way that every government on the planet watched in real time. Moscow is watching with quiet, careful satisfaction. Every week that Washington is consumed by this crisis is a week its attention, its resources, and its political bandwidth are not focused on Ukraine, on NATO's eastern flank, on the pressure campaign Russia needs to manage. Beijing is watching with something more than satisfaction. It is watching with professional interest because China's own anti-access and area denial strategy, its carrier-killing ballistic missile program, its doctrine for holding American forward bases at risk across the Pacific, just received the most compelling live-fire proof of concept it could have asked for. The theory that precision ballistic missiles launched in coordinated salvos with terminal guidance designed to defeat jamming can defeat layered American-supplied air defense systems and destroy high V-value assets in hardened shelters. That theory is no longer theoretical. The Gulf monarchies are doing their own calculations, and those calculations are not trending in Washington's direction. The only path forward that doesn't lead to an all-out regional war, with costs that dwarf anything the American public has been prepared to accept, runs through something the current Washington foreign policy consensus is institutionally incapable of saying out loud: serious, direct, unconditional negotiation with an Iran that has just demonstrated beyond any remaining doubt that it cannot be coerced, cannot be sanctioned into submission, and cannot be deterred by threats it no longer believes. That is the reality. The craters are the evidence, and no amount of official statements expressing deep concern changes a single thing about either of them. I've been saying for years that the assumptions driving American policy in this region were going to collide with reality in a way that could not be managed or spun away. Last night was that collision. And as this story continues to develop, because it is far from over, I will be here giving you the analysis that the people with something to protect will not give you. No hedging, no deference to official narratives, just what the evidence shows and what it means. Stay sharp.